At long last, the Lakers, your 2020 NBA champions. It's been 10 years since we've seen it the last time, but here we are, going to break it down for you here in the next episode of Sideline Sports Podcast. Welcome to Sideline Sports Podcast. If you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast. And we're back to another edition of Sideline Sports Podcast. I'm the host, Alex Naveja, where if you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast. And of course, with me today, none other than the co-host of the Lakers HoopBall Podcast. He's the co-host of the podcast, JC Lebron. JC, how are we feeling right now? I know you were all over that series.
Yeah, it was all over. I watched every game. We podcasted after every game except for Game 5, I think. But, yeah, man, I was all over every series, watched every second of it. Super ecstatic that the Lakers won. Really happy for the city of LA. They've had a lot to deal with this year. Almost all unfortunate fires, the passing of Kobe Bryant, nationwide COVID, a lot of things have happened in California this year, and so to see something really positive happen to that community is really great.
Absolutely. It's been a real tough year. I mean, just with the loss of Kobe, I really think that really made the Lakers into a whole new level. And LeBron just saying some pretty powerful words and saying, I'm going to finish what you started. And him just being that next player, they passed the torch to LeBron, and now him doing exactly what he came for here in LA. He came in wanting to win the championship, and now here he is. He's standing at the top of the mountain saying, we are number one. We are the last standing, and a very tough bubble environment. We were talking about that before we even jumped onto this show.
Yeah, that bubble environment seemed like anything but easy. The fact that there was no travel in between games, I think the Nuggets had the most games every other day. I think for something like 90 days straight, they had a game every other day, and for the most part, it was a game every other day for almost over 100 days for most of those teams. And so, yeah, it definitely wasn't easy. Rachel Nichols talked about how sometimes he would play a game and have to walk back to the hotel and ride the elevator up with the guy that you were just playing against. I remember Jamal Murray had a funny Instagram post the day that Donovan Mitchell dropped 57 on them. It was one of the early morning games, and so a couple hours later he was getting lunch, and like 50 feet away was Donovan Mitchell sitting right there.
Must be pretty awkward. You just, you beat down on a team, or, you go off 56 points, like you said, and then you meet them up. You're like, hey, how you doing? Type of thing. Yeah. It's gotta be pretty awkward right there. But at least for the Lakers, they're fortunate enough that they don't have to meet up with the Heat in the hotel room. Maybe the night of when the Lakers won, maybe. But, Lakers were gone the very next day, bringing the trophy back here to LA. Long 10 years since we've been waiting for it, JC. But Lakers, Heat was actually quite the matchup, I would say. A very fun one. The Heat actually gave the Lakers their money's worth. What do you think about this series?
Yeah, despite how Game 1 went with the Miami jumping out to an early lead, and then I think the Lakers going on a 75 to 40-something run, I was worried all along about the shooting of Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. Hero specifically, because even though he's a 19-year-old rookie, or 20, I believe, that dude is fearless. And nothing intimidates that kid. And so I was worried about that. Duncan Robinson is kind of the next iteration of Klay Thompson. He turns around a corner, he catches and shoots, he doesn't miss. And he got better every game up until Game 6. And so, yeah, those were two guys that specifically I was worried about. A lot of the nation had never really heard of Bam Adebayo, but I have. if they weren't playing the Lakers, man, I would have been all over rooting for the Heat because I actually really loved watching this Heat team all season.
Yeah, they were a real fun team to watch, and for them to progress to the NBA Finals. That wasn't even an easy route for the Heat, having to play the Bucks, having to play against the Celtics, and I believe they played against the 76ers for the very first round. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, that those are tough teams in the Eastern Conference. These are teams that are going to fight, and these are the big dogs here in the Eastern Conference. I can tell you right now, I wouldn't have believed you if you told me, Alex, the Heat are going to the NBA Finals. I would have told you, no, you're crazy. No, I don't believe that for one bit. But no, the Heat are definitely a team that you got to watch out for moving down the line in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, all season long, like I said, I loved watching this Heat team. I think they were ahead of schedule, and so I don't necessarily think they would have made it to the finals this year. I would have told you early in the year, had there not been the disruption of COVID. If you were to tell me earlier in the year, yeah, the Heat might make it to the finals, I would have bought that. I wouldn't have necessarily believed it, but it wouldn't have 100% surprised me.
Absolutely. The Heat, they really did give the Lakers a hard time, and they fought until it was over, and they kept the series very close, 3-2, and for the Lakers to have to finish it up in Game 6. I mean, Game 5 that Friday night was a game where a lot of people thought, hey, did LeBron make the right decision to dish it out to Danny Green? I actually want to ask you what your thought on that is.
Yeah, I mean, LeBron's been my favorite player ever since he came into the league, and part of the reason why he's my favorite player is because of all the things he does all around. And one of my favorite aspects about him is how he makes his teammates better. And so the fact that he made that pass, that instance, the fact that he's made that pass his entire career is part of the reason why he's my favorite player. So, yeah, 10 times out of 10, I would hope that he would give it to Danny Green, and hopefully he would only miss it 2 out of 10 times.
I have to agree with you. I do like the decision LeBron made because it was 5-on-1. What did you expect? People were thinking that, LeBron, are you crazy? You're dishing it out to Danny Green out of all people. And we do all have to say that Danny Green was cold throughout the playoffs. And, he had a rough time behind the arc. But he was wide open and he put up a contested three, and that's all you could do. Danny Green did what he can. LeBron, he's always well known for, if I have the whole team defending me, I'm going to dish it out to somebody that they're paying no attention to and give them a shot, and having the moment, meeting that moment, and facing that moment. I mean, think about when AD shot that game-winning three against the Nuggets. He was trying to do the same thing for Danny Green, and it just didn't work out that way. It just was supposed to happen that on Sunday they were supposed to win. Side note, on my birthday. So that was quite the gift to be able to receive that from the Lakers. But, what did this championship mean for the Lakers? I mean, I know it means a lot. I mean, with the Black Mamba falling this year and all, but what does this mean for them?
It's I think it's the first, to me, I think it's the first championship in the league where things are going to be more balanced. To look at the Eastern Conference first, a lot of people used to call that the Eastern Conference, and there was only one or two good teams. Well, now Miami's going to come back pretty much that entire team next year. Milwaukee's still going to have Giannis. Toronto is still really good. Philadelphia is going to get Doc Rivers as a coach now. Boston is still Boston. And so you're going to have 5, if not 6 really good teams coming out of the East, and then the West is still going to even be more loaded because Golden State's coming back strong. Phoenix was undefeated in the bubble. They might build off of that. Houston is going to get a new coach and a new philosophy, and they may still end up being pretty good. Denver's coming back. Denver is actually opening up a ton of cap space because Paul Millsap and whichever of the not Millsap, Plumlee brothers, whichever of the Plumlee brothers plays on Denver, that's opening up like I think $48 million of cap space.
Wow.
So Denver's going to come back really strong, and so I think, and the Clippers, of course, and so I think it's really hard. It'd be really hard for the Lakers to repeat. I think you're going to end up seeing a string of the next couple of years, different champions all around because the league is that balanced. And so for the Lakers to kind of start that, I think is important.
Right. And it wasn't an easy road for the Lakers either. I mean, having to play against a Trailblazers team that plays really well in the playoffs. We talked about that one. We talked about the Lakers and the Rockets, how the Rockets had the edge on the three-point shooting. Then the Lakers having to play against a very dangerous Denver Nuggets who had all odds against them, which gave them a ton of momentum to beat the Clippers. And then now for the Lakers to defeat a very talented team like the Nuggets, it's I think that was a good prep for the Lakers to play against the Heat. And now I think just the fact that the Heat got to taste and see what it was like to play in the NBA Finals with this new team and being led by Jimmy Butler. I have to say one of the top scorers in the game. That guy, the only reason why the Heat were able to win one of the two games was because the Lakers allowed Jimmy Butler to play his game. And it's just one of those, if you let Jimmy Butler play his game, he's gonna come and get you. He's gonna come and get you, and he'll find a way to get you. Whether he is very good with dishing out to other players, get the assists, and I just like the way that guy plays overall.
He's one of those dangerous players in that he doesn't do any one thing particularly well or even the best in the league, but he does a lot of things well, and he's got the mental fortitude to kind of overtake any weakness he may have. Nothing's really going to stand in his way.
Absolutely. And I definitely do see the Heat going even higher in the Eastern Conference, passing up teams like the Celtics potentially, even the Raptors. Those can be teams that the Heat can pass up if they beat them this year. I don't see why they wouldn't be able to beat them next year. But I feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there, JC. But you know what? How about we take a break? And when we come back, we're going to talk about what's to come for the Lakers, what's next, and what do we think the move is going to be for next season. So make sure to stick around for the second half of Sideline Sports Podcast, where if you're not on the sideline, it's not a Sideline Sports Podcast. We'll be back.
This is George Sayers here on the Block, Baseball Talk podcast host and CSUSM Baseball Club president, and you're listening to Sideline Sports Podcast.
And welcome back to Sideline Sports Podcast. Again, I'm the host, Alex Naveca, where if you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast. And with me today again is JC De Leon, the co-host from the HoopBall Lakers podcast. First half, we were talking about that Lakers Heat NBA final series, that matchup. And now for the second half, we want to talk about what's next for the Lakers. I mean, you just won this championship. And of course, what always comes to mind is what's next? And of course, you're always thinking, can the Lakers two-peat? But I mean, of course, in the NBA, it's not easy, but it does happen. So going into this offseason, what are some things that you want to focus on that the Lakers need as far as if they expect to be a contender?
Well, I think one of the glaring holes that came up anytime they played a team that was relatively small, it kind of forced Anthony Davis to play the five, which is a role that he said he didn't really want to play, but he would be willing if he needed. And so as great as Dwight Howard is and as great as he played at some points of the season, and JaVale was great at setting the tone defensively for this team, because when he would start but end up not playing that many minutes, an upgrade at center is probably – first and foremost, the most needed. And it's got to be a center who's a true five, that is somehow quick enough and agile enough to kind of play centers that play on the outside and guard pick and rolls and things like that. Things that JaVale and Dwight just had trouble doing.
I can agree too. I feel as though they can get a pretty good center and to play inside of the paint. I mean, I felt like Anthony Davis took care of that in a night in, night out basis. But the route I want to go to is I want to see better consistent three-point shooters from the Lakers. I saw way too many threes that they were missing, and I just felt like during the finals and even during the playoffs and even coming back during the bubble, the Lakers just fell off the map when it came to shooting three-pointers. And I just felt like maybe the choices in the shots that they were making or they're trying to take, not the best of decisions. I felt like they gave away a lot of possessions during the playoffs and even during this NBA final. So I want to see more three-point shooters on this team. And of course, number one on the list has to be to keep Anthony Davis here as a Laker. That is a definite big one.
Yeah, I to me it seemed like kind of a formality. I don't see where else he could have gone, and so it is the number one concern. I don't think it was too much of a concern because I don't think he was really going anywhere. Yeah, 3-point shooting is definitely necessary because as Danny Green gets older, he's going to be less of a good defender and probably even less of a good shooter as he gets older. And another thing that if they're going to rely on Alex Caruso as much as they are defensively, his second year he was a pretty good 3-point shooter. He was a near 40% 3-point shooter, and this season, I don't know if it was sightlines in the bubble or the time off he was horrendous. He's a horrendous 3-point shooter this season, and he wasn't before. And so he needs to get back to being a reliable 3-point shooter, and I think he could even be in the starting lineup in that case.
I think so too. Caruso definitely does come in with a lot of energy. He's one of those players that will get the bench up on their feet. He'll energize the team because he's capable of that. He reminds me of a Shannon Brown type of player, but you got to be able to knock down the threes, and you got to be one of those players that they could dish it out to you, and you'll be a good 3-point shooter there. But it'll be interesting to see what route the Lakers are going to take for this offseason. Now, I want to ask you, we were talking about this before, where does this championship put LeBron James as far as the all-time players? I know there's been a lot of chatter, there's been a lot of talk. I kind of want to just put the plug on this talk. Now, I want to get your opinion on it.
The thing about that is like putting a plug in it is kind of hard just because my thing has always been with Michael, who I'm 38 years old, and so a lot of people are like, if you didn't grow up to see Jordan, you didn't appreciate him, or if you grew up and saw him as a kid, he's automatically your favorite, and it's not the case with me. He's obviously great. LeBron is my favorite player of all time. I think he's overall more skilled. I think what it's going to end up coming down to is we had 15 years of Michael Jordan. 15 years of in which 6 he was at the top of the game, 2 3-peats. We're in year 7. We just finished year 17 of LeBron. We're going to end up getting to year 2021 maybe. And so for me, I'd rather fully take on the discussion once the career is done, because I think in my opinion, the overall numbers are going to be so overwhelming, despite the fact that LeBron didn't have a perfect record in the finals. Very few people did. Kobe didn't. Shaq didn't. Magic didn't. So I think the fact that he didn't have a perfect record in the finals shouldn't really hurt him, because, you can also look at other things and other finals numbers that don't kind of make sense. Robert Horry has 7 championships. He's not in the Hall of Fame. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think to only look at it with championships doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It doesn't tell the whole picture. And to me, in my opinion, I just don't think the book on LeBron is anywhere near done yet. And that's kind of why. I certainly don't fault anyone for thinking that Michael is the greatest. For a long time, he in a lot of people's eyes he was, and to a lot of people's eyes he is. And so, yeah, if he's the number one for you, that's perfectly fine. I think with LeBron, for him to even be in discussion is great, because so many people were coming up and were going to be the next Jordan and just didn't even come close to being that.
Well, JC, I hope we can still be cool after this, because I do have to say that I don't think anyone's ever going to beat MJ and just the type of player that he is. You really do have to appreciate that competitive nature that he has, and just what he's done in his career, just playing while he's sick. And, this guy was probably on the verge of, being hospitalized in maybe an instance or two. And the one I think about was that pizza that got him sick before playing against Utah Jazz, and still coming in and winning that game. That's something that you just don't ever see ever. And just what it's like, yes, what he has done is great. It's amazing. And it's just, again, it's nothing that you're ever going to see or hear about, but just the way MJ carried himself, the way he attacked the basket, just the way he scored points, and like the way he was a great defensive player, and just an overall, like when you think about a basketball player, I always think of MJ. Just the fact you think of a basketball player as someone that has hops like a fly, basically, and could do the ridiculous things that MJ was able to do. That was really not human, really, and just MJ. I always see him as the face of the NBA, and he will always be the best player, at least in my eyes. And I know you and I will, we could discuss about that every night, and we can still keep going at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue one way or the other, like, so definitively, just because I think they're both so close.
Absolutely. And I think you said it just right. There's always going to be that comparison, LeBron and MJ. Who's the better one? Who's the better one? And you know what? I guess we're never gonna put the cap on the talk, right?
Yeah.
It is what it is. We'll have to keep listening, and we'll just keep hearing what the people have to say. But you know what? That's all the time we have left here on Sideline Sports Podcast. We thank you all so much for tuning into this one. If you guys are enjoying the content like this one, and of course guests like JC, please give this episode a thumbs up. Also, hit the subscribe button down below. We're only getting more and more fans and more supporters, and even great guests like JC DeLeon from HoopBall Lakers podcast, and we're going to grow from there, folks. And again, I wanted to give a special thank you to JC DeLeon, the co-host of the HoopBall Lakers podcast, for always coming in clutch. Thanks again for coming on, JC.
Yeah, no problem. Always happy to help.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast, the source of all of your SoCal sports. Make sure to tune in, Dodgers and Braves. Have a good one, guys.